lift and everything, and then you should let me and Tyler put them lines on that you put on. It's all your fault. It's all your fault, Ben.
Oh, Ben,
I knew they was gonna have something to say about it.
All right, here we go. Technician A says an oxygen sensor produces a voltage output signal based on the oxygen content of the exhaust stream. Technician B says if the exhaust has little oxygen, the voltage of the oxygen sensor will be close to 0 volts. Who is right? What does a lean exhaust mixture mean? In other words, if my oxygen sensor goes lean on a normal car, on a regular, what am I going to see my oxygen sensor voltage do? If I'm monitoring oxygen sensor voltage and I pop a vacuum line off, where's the oxygen sensor voltage?
Well, rich is too much fuel, so lean with the voltage.
The air fuel mixture is out of balance,
right.
Basically to the fuel side, if it's rich. So what's the sensor going to be doing? That's the thing.
If it's out of balance, would it go up?
Yeah. If this is what you got here, you got 0.5, you got 0, and you got 1 volt. With this here being your, whenever you're talking about cross counts, I don't know how many times it's crossing the halfway mark. And even on air fuel sensors, which is a sort of a more accurate way of measuring, they still, if one of the people, the teachers at the MAX convention was saying, the air fuel sensor on your scan tool is going to read some different values, but if you measure it, it's still reading 0 to 1 volt with a scope. But on the scan tool, the numbers are interpolated different. They look like 2.5 to 3.5 or something like that. But anyway, this is lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, lean. All right. So what you got here is every time when it's going up here, as soon as it gets up this way, the fuel trim starts taking fuel away, the short fuel trim. And when the short fuel trim takes fuel away, it causes it to go back lean. And then the short fuel trim says, okay, I've gone back lean now, I got to start putting fuel back in there. And so your short fuel trim is going to look like sort of like a sawtooth, like that, except it's a little sharper than what I'm drawing right there. And the fuel trim is actually what's causing this to happen. Now, if, for some reason, if you popped a vacuum line off, this right here would stop switching and it would go down here. All right, when it stops switching and goes down there, this fuel trim, which had been seesawing really nicely, starts to step up. Keeps adding fuel, and this is going by percentages. It usually runs from 0 to, it's like a number line. And 0 would be it in the middle, and then it goes to like 35 one way and 35 minus, 35 plus, 35 minus. And so you're going to see this thing right here keep going up. If this keeps going up and it hits the top of what it, really high, the maximum limit, the long fuel trim then ratchets up 1 click. And it keeps ratcheting the long fuel trim up until it gets it way up here where this one topped out at. And it holds that much richer so that this starts switching like it's supposed to again. So you may go in and see your oxygen sensor doing perfectly normal. You may see your short fuel trim reading 0 or close to it. But then when you look at long fuel trim, it's way off. And that tells you got a problem. But a computer is actually making the exhaust clean because it's adding fuel to keep that thing in balance. So the long and the short of it is, if I was walking and I was trying to do a balancing act, right, and I was carrying 2 bags, right, and people were constantly supposed to be putting stuff in one bag and then the other, with me like this right here, and all of a sudden some yo-yos on this side of the water over here starts putting more in this bag than these people over here, I'm going to have to correct for that so I don't fall off the board, right? And and my personal balance system is going to tell me, my left hand is holding more weight than my right hand, and I'm having to, hold off like this. That's what the long fuel trims are doing. They're holding that thing bent way out of line to keep it balanced. That's what it's doing. So let's say that you found a long fuel trim reading. If it's reading plus, that means that it's got a lean condition and it's adding fuel. Got that? If it's reading minus, that means it's really got some fuel coming in there that doesn't belong and it's having to subtract fuel. That's how that works. I mean, if you're looking at your fuel trims, the fuel trims are the first thing you look at. There's a ton of people all over the country out here that are working on these cars that don't even pay any attention to fuel trim. They want to pull a code, throw a part on, put it out of the shop, get their big money, go home and eat their cornbread. You know what I'm saying? And Joey Hendrick is a guy that sells these scan tools and stuff. And he is a real sharp cookie. And he says when he's doing tech support on the phone, he'll be talking to a shop somewhere. And I used to have this too when people would call me for tech support when I was at Ford. And I would say, what's the fuel pressure? And they wouldn't know. I mean, what are you calling me for if you hadn't even checked the basics, man? You know what I'm saying? Don't make any sense. You know, you're calling yourself a mechanic, you got tools, you got a shop, you got cars in there, people are trusting you to fix. You hadn't checked any of the stuff you're supposed to be checking. And now you want me to give you a silver bullet. You know, tighten the screw behind the headlight over there about 6 inches away that's silver with a green wire going to it, and all their gas mileage problems will go away, and you'll get a $150, you know, repair. You know, basically you got to check the basic stuff and make sure you know what's going on before you even bother. Anyway, listen, lean is typically going to be low voltage. Rich is going to be high voltage. Remember this, lean and L, lean and low? That ain't hard to remember. There is a caveat to that. On that gray Jeep Cherokee out there, if you were measuring the oxygen sensor voltage on that, even on a scan tool, it's all screwed up. Don't burn this in because you're not going to see it on anything except that Jeep Cherokee. 5 volts is lean, 0 volts is rich. It looks the same on the graph, the pink graph, the white screen with a pink graph with the oxygen sensor. That is off of a Jeep like that gray one. It's a crazy, stupid oxygen sensor deal, but it's a titanium sensor that measures the temperature of the exhaust. Now, I want you to listen to this too, because this is going to be important later. You remember when we talked about exhaust ping, detonation, spark knock, this kind of stuff? People call it valve clatter, but that ain't what it is. It ain't got nothing to do with the valves. It's got everything to do with, you know, the explosion happening early and ringing the piston like a bell and all this kind of stuff. So what you got in there, I mean, that explosion is so violent, it's almost like hitting everything with a hammer at one time in there. Bing! You know, that's why you're hearing all them ling-a-ling-ling rattling and all. So a lean exhaust is hot, a rich exhaust is cool. So based on that, the Bendix people that made the fuel injection for that Jeep, which is just about bulletproof, by the way, they would say, since the lean exhaust is hot, then what we'll go ahead and do is we'll put a resistor in there, a titanium oxygen sensor measures the temperature of the exhaust. Now, the reason I know that is because I probably spent as much time in 1989 in Jeep school as I did at the dealership, because we had bought the franchise, and they sent me to Atlanta probably 5-6 times that year for a week at a time, and I got sick of that. But anyway, that guy went over it over and over and over again. Now, so somebody give me an answer on that one. Technician A says an oxygen sensor produces a voltage output signal based on the oxygen content of the exhaust. Is he telling the truth?
Yes.
Okay, technician B says if the exhaust has little oxygen, the voltage of the oxygen sensor will be close to 0 volts. That's that tantamount to saying a rich mixture is reading low voltage, which is the opposite of what I just told you. Am I right about that? Okay. All right. Technician A says oxygen sensors can have 1, 2, 3, 4, or more wires depending on the style and the design. Technician B says if the exhaust has little oxygen, the voltage of the oxygen sensor will be close to 1 volt and close to 0 if there's high oxygen content in the exhaust. Oxygen sensors will have either 1, 2, 3, or 4 wires typically.
Right, not no more than that.
Yeah. If you've got a 1-wire oxygen sensor, where does that oxygen sensor get its ground? Every voltage, the oxygen sensor creates voltage. All of you have seen me take the little oxygen sensor out there that I've got in that pipe and heat it with a torch and it makes voltage on the scope, right? You've seen every sense do that. Okay, that thing has got to get a ground from somewhere, right? So what we're going to do, a 2-wire oxygen, well, a 1-wire oxygen sensor, you know, is going to have this booby threaded into the exhaust stream and all this, and it's got 1 wire going out of it, and it depends on its connection to the exhaust for its ground. That's not too reliable. It depends on the exhaust to heat it up to 600 degrees so it'll start putting out. That ain't real good. GM did that for a while. Ford did it for a while. Chrysler did it for a while. The first oxygen sensors that I ever knew about came out in '75 on, you know, some cars over in Europe. And that's why I call it a lambda sensor, you know. But anyway, the 2-wire oxygen sensors, if you see one of those, it's got one is going back to the PCM for a ground, and the other one's going back to the PCM for a signal, typically. So you got them both going to the PCM. A 3-wire oxygen sensor has got a signal wire. Oh, they all got a signal wire. But on a 3-wire oxygen sensor, you've got a ground, and you've got a heater. I mean, current coming in to make a heater, and the heater's like a sort of a cigarette lighter element built in there that's going to heat that thing up real fast. A 4-wire sensor has got a ground for the signal, a ground for the heater, and then it's got volts, and then it's got a signal. Now, sometimes you will get a code, and I may throw bugs for this just to get y'all dandered up, but you'll have a code that it will throw you, and it'll say the oxygen sensor heater is not working. Now, this is what I like to do. I like to take an old oxygen sensor. Whenever I get an old oxygen, I'm changing out oxygen, I like to cut the wire off of it and save that wire. All right, so now I've got this thing is 4-wire sensor going to this oxygen sensor. And then you're going down there. Incidentally, you're not supposed to, what we were always told, you're not supposed to splice these wires because the oxygen that goes down inside that sensor travels through these wires somehow. I don't know how true that is. But the fact is, I'm always particularly careful about fixing them wires. And it, seems like I have patched them a time or two. It didn't make a lot of difference, so whatever happened, just take that under advisement. If you ever patch the wires and the stupid thing still don't work, put a sensor on it. Because dogs will eat them wires. I mean, they will. The dogs will get there and chew the daggum wires off. I've seen that happen repeatedly. All right, so I'm going to take this oxygen sensor out of the loop. Now, you got power and ground coming through here, and a computer can measure how many amps that oxygen sensor heater's pulling. Sometimes the oxygen sensor heater goes bad, and it doesn't work anymore. If I hook power and ground up to an oxygen sensor I got on the table out there, it's going to get hot in your hand. It's going to get so hot you can't hold it. It gets hot pretty darn quick, too. All right, so I'm going to take the oxygen sensor out of the loop, and I'm going to take an old connector that I got from another oxygen sensor, and I'm on the 2 white wires, typically, on the ones that, most of them. Well, you got a black wire, a gray wire, and 2 white wires, ordinarily, on the old sensor connector. And I'm going to put a light bulb. Just took a light bulb to these 2 white wires. All right, now I'm going to plug that connector in to this oxygen sensor connector, and I'm going to crank the car up, and if that light bulb comes on, what do I know? I know there's power and ground making it to that sensor, and if that sensor's throwing me, and make darn sure you know which sensor you're working on. Make sure you know which one's bank 1, sensor 1, bank 2, sensor. Don't work on this sensor over here when that one back there is one giving you trouble. Because when these things first came out with all these multiple sensors in the early 90s, I got smacked around by a Thunderbird because I was working on the wrong dadgum sensor. Didn't know which one was which. Make sure to begin with you're running the right one. Getting a heater code, plug that light bulb in, the light bulb comes on. I know I got power and ground coming down there. So now I'm going to put a sensor on it. That takes care of it. Ain't that hard to figure out, right? If I got a heater code and I plug this in and it don't come on, I know I got wiring problems. Next, I got to determine, do I have power? Do I have ground? Which one of those is missing? And you'll be surprised. You'll go up there where one's been rubbing on the manifold and it's rubbed the ground wire into, and now it's just, the wires are doing this little thing right here. So that's a fairly common thing right there. This is engine performance 2, and I'm serious about teaching it, so y'all bear with me, okay? And this will take a while. All right, technician. Technician B is the only one that's right there. You're not going to have, more than 4 wires typically, and that's what the book is wanting in that particular case. Technician A says a wideband oxygen sensor, which is also called a lean air fuel or linear air fuel ratio sensor, can detect air fuel ratios from as much as 12.1 to as lean as 18.1. Technician B says the oxygen sensor signal determines the fuel trim, which is used to tailor the air-fuel mixture for the catalytic converter, which is right. Anybody got any idea about that?
A is right when it's talking about Toyotas.
I'm sorry, say that again.
A is right if they're talking about Toyota vehicles.
Right, exactly.
The book says it uses 5 wires.
Yep. Wow, that's interesting. But that's actually called, that's not an oxygen sensor though, that's a wideband. Yeah, linear air fuel ratio sensor. So that's the difference between, the semantics in the test can cause the answer to the question to be different. Because technically that's not even considered an oxygen sensor, it's an air fuel sensor.
Oh, okay.
See, because of the way that they're setting it up. Technician B says oxygen sensor signal determines fuel trim. What did I just say a while ago? Fuel trim responds to oxygen sensor input to the computer, doesn't it? Okay, the fuel, everybody understands that when you're talking about, does everybody understand the closed loop fuel control? What do you mean by that? What does it mean, Lee, when I'm talking about closed loop fuel control?
Closed loop is when it's pretty much cycles on, when everything's working good, like when we was working on that truck out there, it wouldn't doing because that temperature sending unit wasn't working pretty
It
well.
wouldn't go into closed loop because the engine was too cold. When it gets to the point of where it knows it can trust the oxygen sensor,
And when
it
it's
starts using the oxygen sensor to determine fuel trim.
running too cold, it'll dump more fuel than it should.
It would, but I mean, too cold keeps it from going into closed loop. So basically, but in one way or another, your closed loop fuel control. Ellen Smith explained this to me in Houston in 1981, and I met people 5-6 years later that didn't understand it, you know. But basically, your computer's controlling the fuel, right? Going into the engine. Am I right about that? PCM engine. I'm just drawing this real simple. I'm not trying to draw a complicated diagram. And then you got the exhaust going out here. Okay, we're going to put a sensor right here in the exhaust so that we'll know how we're doing. That's basically that. That sensor is going to go talk to the PCM when the loop is closed. And the PCM is going to alter the fuel it gives the engine based on what this sensor tells it. That's the closed loop. When you're at wide open throttle, when the engine is cold, and if the engine is overheating, this kind of stuff a lot of times, it breaks that loop and it starts using everything but the oxygen sensor to determine what to do with the fuel. That's open loop fuel control. And you'll see on your scan tool, open loop, closed loop. You better understand what that means.
Well,
Really
it does
important.
what it wants to do.
No, well, it does what it needs to do for optimum, you know, like if you're passing a semi going up a hill, you don't need the PCM jacking around with your air fuel mixture. You need all the fuel you can get so you can get around this thing, you know, this car.
Yeah.
But that's at wide open throttle. But if you're cruising down the highway in a nice little float, it's going to be paying attention to what this does so it can run it an optimum clean, right? And so that's basically, if you got a full circle there, it's paying attention, it's readjusting the fuel, it's doing it. See, that's the right way, like that. So now you got a loop. But whenever the oxygen sensor is out of the loop, you got an open loop system. And we talked a little bit about loop systems the other day. Like for instance, my wristwatch is a real complicated piece of equipment, but it has no clue whether it's right or wrong. Does it? It don't have the foggiest idea. Unless I happen to have a wristwatch that's an atomic watch that can communicate with the, atomic clock up in Denver or whatever, that signal they put out. Like these atomic clocks on the wall, they adjust themselves. We got one with hands on it the air conditioner thermostat over there is a closed loop system. It senses the temperature in the room. If the temperature goes below what it is set to, it kicks on the air. When the temperature gets up, it shuts it off. That's a closed loop system. Closed loop system. Got it? So if you're the EGR system on that engine right there is a closed loop system. The PCM operates EGR. It's watching to see how the EGR is doing, looking at flow. If it doesn't like what it sees, it puts a little less EGR. You're sitting in your car. You turn up your radio. If you turn it up too loud, whoever's with you might not like for it to be that loud. Say, turn that down. And so you turn it down. That is the closed loop. Valerie punches him in the ear. Turn the radio down, So anyway, so anyway, you turn the radio down and you turn it up based on the feedback to your ears. That's the point. So you got to understand open and closed loop systems. You got a feedback system on just about everything on the car. Transmissions. When a transmission in the powertrain control module knows how fast the engine's turning, it knows what gear it's in, it knows what the vehicle speed is. They got a lot of feedback loops on there because sometimes it'll know what the turbine shaft is doing, it'll know what the output shaft is doing, plus it knows how fast the vehicle's going. And it factors all that in. So if it tells it to shift to second gear or third gear and it stays in second, it knows it stayed in second. What's your feedback on that? You're watching the TAC. You're listening to it. You're hearing the engine. And if it goes, it's hitting all three gears. But if it goes, you're saying, wait a minute, see what I'm saying? Incorrect gear ratio obtained to third gear. It's a feedback loop, okay? Understand the feedback loop.
About 2 semesters ago, Lawrence, me and Amanda was working on the wheel speed sensor. And the scan tool, we was looking at this one, but the whole time we didn't know it. We finally figured out it was reading the other wheel sensor. You remember that? We replaced that one because it wouldn't read,
Yep.
but it was the other one that wouldn't.
That was on that stupid Dodge, and that was a scan tool problem, is what it was. Because the right rear sensor was the one that was telling us was bad, and we worked and checked this and checked that and checked the other, and everything seemed like it was okay. and just did all kinds of stuff. And then it turned out that the stupid one on the left was the one giving the trouble, and the scan tool was reporting the one on the right.
Oh, man.
And it wouldn't throw us any codes either. You know what I'm saying? So I took it to Donnie out there, and he plugged his DRB3 in, and it said the rear sensor threw 2 codes, and the left rear sensor was showing that it wasn't reporting. Well, the Genesis told me it was this one over here. And I've seen that. I saw that on Ford stuff. With the Ford Worldwide Diagnostic System, it was made to do Ford. I had that on Explorer. It was reporting one sensor, and it was the opposite when it was on a Contour. Excuse me. I'd seen that before. Anyway, that's another thing. That's all a feedback deal. All right, now then, sometimes if your feedback's lying, though, you go off in the wrong direction. See what I'm saying? That's what the whole deal is about this. All right. So, number 3 should be C, right? Oxygen sensor cross counts can only be determined using which of these?
Let's see.
Wait a minute. What about a scan tool? The scan tool is going to count going to give you cross count numbers. It's actually got a PID for that. And, you know, they got software written in there that'll tell you in the PCM it's going to report cross counts and all that. There's Ben without his book or nothing. So there's copy now.
Hey, man, I asked for a book earlier. I bought it.
Oh, that's not bad. That's okay. You're having to listen to me, so that's worth it all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm telling you stuff that's not in the book. Have I told you stuff that's not in the book? Isn't this great stuff? You know what I'm saying? All right. So we're trying to learn this, and you guys are listening and all that. You know what Craig said last night? He's taught these classes all over the place. What did he tell us, Lawrence? He said this was one of the smartest, most attentive classes that he ever taught on this tour. He said, I don't know what's in the water down in Florida with those guys down there. I don't know what kind of problem he had with the guys he taught in Florida, but he said he didn't. I don't know what was going on down there, but anyway, that was neat. Oxygen sensor cross counts can only be determined by using a scan tool. The sensor that must be warned of cross counts. Wait a minute. Let's stop. Everybody knows what cross counts are, right? How often it crosses the halfway mark, right? So, and an oxygen sensor is supposed to be working pretty snappy. You might notice that when it's idling, sometimes it's a little lazier than it ought to be. And when I was working with one time, years ago, before we ever had fuel trims or anything like that, I'd get into the meter with my meter and the oxygen sensor, and I'd look for that thing to be switching pretty snappy. If I didn't like what I saw, I'd put an oxygen sensor on it right to start with before I did anything else. All right. Make sure it's working crisp. And if you run the throttle up to about 1,200, 1,500 RPM, it'll usually be a lot snappier then than it even is idling. The sensor that must be warmed and functioning before the engine management computer will go into closed loop is which one? Yeah, well, duh. We're talking about oxygen sensor. Let's just, it's got to get to a certain temperature. The heater's there to get it there quicker, right? There's these Toyota hybrids, like he was talking about the other night. It's got that little hot water bottle over here on the behind. It's like a thermos that's got hot engine coolant. It's supposed to keep that engine coolant hot for 2 or 3 days.
That's that round thing.
Yeah, that big round thing. It's behind the headlight down on the left side up until 2010. Then they got rid of it and started doing it a different way. Well, when you turn that thing on, it kicks that pump in, and it pumps all that hot water through the cylinder head, warms it up, and it's immediately ready to go into closed loop. Well, let me give you a little secret about that. These guys up there and he didn't even mention this, but the guys up at the school, some of the other teams that were working on one of those cars, they said the car had been sitting there for a couple of days. It was in Massachusetts, but it wasn't all that cold up there, really. And they said, I don't think this thing keeps this water hot as long as they say it does. Because that car was driven a pretty good bit and parked there. Whenever they drained the coolant out of it, it just barely was warm. It wasn't more than about 110 degrees. I mean, maybe a little. It felt like that wasn't even as hot as a shower. It wouldn't even burn your hand. Of course, what he's talking about is if you've got some hoses took loose and it kicks that pump on and pumps hot water out on you and it is hot, that's a bear. That's a problem. You see what I'm saying? All right. Okay, the sensor that, let's see, Technician A says O2 sensors can be tested using a test light or a dwell meter. What is a dwell meter? Anybody know what a dwell meter is? Or a scan tool? That guy there is a yo-yo. Technician B says conditions can occur that cause the oxygen sensor to be fooled and give a false lean or false rich signal to the PCM. Who is right? 6. That's number 6. B. That's a B. All right, you got it? You're not going to test an oxygen sensor with a dwell meter.
What is a dwell meter?
A dwell meter, let me show you this distributor over here. And there's some, confusion on that. This computer, see those ignition points opening and closing in there? You see them? You barely can see. I'm gonna pass this around. You spin that. If you watch those points, you stop that little bump underneath that rubbing block on that points, it opens those points. The dwell meter was originally designed to connect to the negative terminal on there, and it would make a calculation based on how many degrees of distributor rotation that the points were closed. Got it? In other words, the distributor is turning. The distributor turns 360 degrees, right? On an 8-cylinder, what's 8 into 360?
Boy.
That's right. So the maximum amount of dwell that you can have, you know, in other words, if you got that, you usually on this here the dwell reading. If you got a dwell meter and it's got a little needle that's going to show you degrees, you know, basically you're just looking at numbers on there. And when you change the points, that dwell, you know, if you widen the points, the dwell number goes down because it's closed less of the time. So if it's only closed 15% of the time, the points are too wide. If they're supposed to be about 30 to 32 degrees of dwell that they're supposed to be closed. Okay, because of the fact that was being used take that around there, Ben, and look at those points. See, the points are right here. You're going to see the little contact points right there. When you turn that thing through, you'll see them opening and closing. The amount of time that they're closed is going to determine how much distributor saturation time there is, and just all kinds of stuff, right? See them? In 72 it was Chrysler stopped doing it. 74 to 75 GM and them stopped doing it. Some of the Asian cars still had points in the distributor, but they didn't use them to directly fire the coil. They used them to trigger the module, and so points have been gone for ever since the early 70s, pretty much. But I put in a bunch of points. I mean, and points and condensers. That little condenser in there. See, you understand what I'm saying? Are you the amount of time that the points are closed is a really important number? Okay, so General Motors had this feedback carburetor, right? The feedback carburetor confused the crud out of some of the guys that have been using dwell meters for years and years. And this was another one of those Ellen Smith things. She gave me a lot of foundational knowledge that I carry with me to this very day. You know, she was a really good instructor. And these guys were really intimidated by her, too, because she was so doggone knowledgeable, you know. And she wasn't particularly attractive, but everybody had a tremendous amount of respect for her, and everybody liked her. But this thing right here, there's a green wire. If you've ever took the breather off of a Chevrolet, like a 350 with a feedback carburetor on it, there's a green wire hanging there that's not plugged into anything. You hook a dwell meter to it. And that particular green wire was connected to this feedback solenoid. It was the metering rod, the gas flowing through the jets that goes to the reservoir in that carburetor through this venturi and goes down into the engine was going through this jet. And there was one jet for each venturi, right? So if you wanted not as much gas to go through those jets, some carburetors have metering rods. It's a little tapered rod, and the deeper that metering rod goes into that jet, the more it kind of takes up some of the space and not as much gas can go through there. That's how critical that little bit of gas is. Well, General Motors had a little solenoid in there. It would go up and down 10 times a second. Click, 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 click. If you've ever heard one of those feedback carburetors on a Chevrolet, you'd hear them things click, 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 click. All right, so it could go down and it could stay down from 1/10 to 9/10 of a second. It went down 10 times a second. And it would actually keep it down from 1/10 of a second to 9/10 of a second. And if it was holding it down more, that meant that the oxygen, it was running lean. It was actually forcing the system lean. If it was down less, which would be, think about it, if it's energized, that's going to be a higher dwell number, isn't it? And that's going to be pulling the solenoid down, and it's going to be causing it to go, run leaner because it's got those metering rods in the jets, and it's not letting this fuel go. All right, so you hook your dwell meter up, and the dwell meter would basically look like it would have, readings all the way, 10, 15, 25, 35, 45, 50, 65, this kind of crud. All right, the needle on that dwell meter, if that thing was working like it was supposed to and the oxygen sensor was telling the truth and switching up and down like it was supposed to, this was a feedback carburetor now, it wasn't fuel injection, it would go like this. You'd see that needle going back and forth on the dwell meter. Now on your distributor, it's going to be pretty much locked in on whatever, it would change when you change most of them you can't, on a GM you could change the point adjustment with the engine running, but on nothing else you could because you'd have to pull a cap off and move it and all that. But anyway, it's doing this, like that. And if it was not right, if it was way down here, right, which meant what? It's forcing it rich because it's leaving the metering rod out of the jets. Because that means there's a vacuum leak somewhere. That's what you usually saw. If the vacuum leak somewhere, that needle will be down here just pretty well staying still. But if the thing was running too rich and the command was to go lean, that needle would go over here. And what you wanted to see, what was beautiful and what was perfect, was this. You wanted to see it going back and forth. But it used a dwell meter to do it. When the dwell meter was originally designed to check the distributor of the point dwell, which gave you the coil saturation time and all that. Did I clear that up at all? Did I tell you how to use a butterfly to kill a hammer or something like that? You know what I'm saying? Did I tell you how to build a watch? All right. Now that's what the instructors do, right? They tell you how to build a watch when you just ask a simple question, you know. All right. So that's what a dwell meter does, and I had a dwell meter in my toolbox for years and years and years. I don't even know if I still got it anymore because you just no use for it anymore. A heated zirconia oxide. You don't. Incidentally, let me tell you this: you don't have to have a dwell meter to set the points. You can set them on a feeler gauge. You know, and usually about 16, 18 thousandths. You know, if you put them on the high thing of that and adjust the point so that the feeler gauge drags when it's between 16 to 18 thousandths, something like that. All right, so let's see. So six, I've told you that's going to be B. 7, a heated zirconia oxygen sensor will have how many wires?
3 and 4. That'd be D.
Yeah, well, yeah, it'll be actually a D. It'll be B or C, 3 or 4. Remember I told you a while ago some of them had 3 wires. The heated ones will have 3 or 4. High oxygen sensor signal voltage could be due to which of these? Rich exhaust. Okay, let me tell you this. Let me tell you something else right quick. I'll give you a little caveat on that. And this is field experience. I don't know if I've ever seen it in any book. When I would go in there and I would measure my oxygen sensor voltage, right? I would, like to watch it on the meter. And it's supposed to be reading between 0 and 1 volt, right? All right, so I would measure it. If I had gone in there and measured it, and the engine would be running rich because it was seeing a lean mixture, it was confused about that. But when I measured the voltage at the sensor, I would see 2.5 volts. And I say, why am I seeing 2.5 volts on a sensor that's not supposed to be reading between 0 and 1? Well, the reason would be because, and I don't know how many of these I fixed, Bronco 2 had an orange ground wire that was for the oxygen sensor, and it went on the back of the right cylinder head under the dipstick bolt. And when people would be working on the transmission or whatever or something, they'd fool around, or that wire would get broke off, and that wire would be just a swinging back there. You could go reach in behind the wheel and feel that wire, and people would come in, and it was puffing black smoke running rich, and somebody already put an oxygen sensor in it. I'd reach back there, and I would feel, and that wire would be loose, and I'd, either put a, it's aggravating to work on because it's up in there where you can't really get to it, but I'd put it under that bolt. Now, some people would say, well, it's a little bit easier just to, tack onto it and pull it up here and hook it onto the plenum. That ain't a good thing. It needs to be hooked to the cylinder head as close to the exhaust as you can get it so that it won't have noise between, So anyway, if you've got a bad oxygen sensor ground, most of them after that, they started taking that ground all the way back to the computer like signal return. And it eliminated those kinds of problems. But I fixed a bunch of them darn things. So, I put a good crisp oxygen sensor in there if it hadn't already been changed, and I'd fix that ground, and everybody'd be happy then.
Forget to put it on, and when they get done, they see it loose, and they say, "Oh, forget it."
Yeah, it's this little wire. And sometimes, this is really funny, y'all. I would see oxygen sensors. One time on Thunderbird, that some guys that worked on the other part of the shop that had 2 oxygen sensors. It just only had 2. It had one for each bank. I was driving that thing with some stuff hooked up to it so that I could read. And I noticed that the oxygen sensors, have you ever seen one of these electric blankets that's got 2 controls? Okay, Mom likes to be a little warmer in the bed than Dad does, so she turns her blanket up and Dad turns his down because he's going to start to sweat, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens is, what if Mom and Dad get their controls crossed?
Oh, man.
She's cranking hers up, and it's burning him out, and he's cranking hers down, and she's freezing, and she keeps cranking it up. Yeah. So it just doesn't work because they got them crossed. So people would, actually, those oxygen sensors were dangling close enough to one another to where they'd plug them in backwards. And so what would happen was this bank over here would say, I need more fuel. And the other one would say, okay, I'll give you some more fuel. Well, that bank, since they were crossed, they were getting mixed signals. And you see the oxygen sensors, they just go completely out of balance. And I watched that happen. I said, the only thing that can be wrong, the first time I saw it, they had a little device hooked to it, would be red and green, red for rich, green for lean. And they would just go in opposite directions. And I said, I bet I know what's wrong with that. When I moved them, clicked them back around, they started doing what they're supposed to. That's something that you probably won't see in the book either. But I think some of the later model cars have actually got code that the computer will throw that tells you the oxygen sensor lines are reversed, you know. I've actually run into that happening. Okay, high oxygen sensor voltage could be due to which of these? A rich exhaust, lean exhaust, defective spark plug wire, or both A and C? Which one would that be? That's going to be 8. Now, I'm going to tell you this. That's the answer they want because it's a simplified answer. And I've seen many a student and many a mechanic get smacked around on that. Okay? Listen to this. Somebody will say, and I've done this in here, and I gotta keep doing it so I can make sure everybody's still got this burned in. Okay, I'm driving down the road on Ben's truck, right? Okay, and everything, the oxygen sensors are switching just like they're supposed to. And then all of a sudden, huh?
And drive into a pond.
And I drive into a pond, yeah. And I've actually ruined everything when I do that. But anyway, what I've got right here is, all of a sudden I've got a spark plug that starts to misfire. Because maybe when Ben changed the spark plugs, he cracked it and then things deteriorate and it starts just missing all the time. So this spark plug starts to misfire. The instant it starts to misfire, and he's only got that one oxygen sensor on that 4-cylinder, what's that oxygen sensor going to tell the PCM as soon as that misfire starts to happen? What kind of signal is the PCM going to get? What is the PCM going to believe about that air-fuel mixture?
It's going to dump more fuel, ain't it? Because it's trying to compensate for that.
No, I'm talking about just as soon as it happens, as soon as it starts misfiring, the PCM is going to pick up. The PCM is going to know about it in the exhaust. And what's it going to see there?
Maybe a rich exhaust.
Yeah, rich exhaust.
What do you think?
I think it's rich.
What do you think? Are you even paying attention? What do you think? Rich or lean?
Rich.
What do you think?
Go out on them.
She don't say lean to be different.
Rich.
Yeah, I'm going with rich on that.
Everybody fell in the same trap. Listen, what is the oxygen sensor smelling? What's it smelling? Oxygen.
So pretty much if
It doesn't give a rip about gas. It doesn't know. But whenever that cylinder is not firing, what's coming out of there along with all of that gas that didn't burn? A bunch of
Black
oxygen that didn't burn. See what I'm saying? It's not going to read rich because it's not paying attention to anything except the oxygen, and it's going to see that. Now, the reason I said that as soon as it happens, because as soon as it happens and it sees that lean exhaust, what does it do? The PCM says, lean, I need to correct. And so it ramps up the fuel to try to correct that. Now everything is running rich.
Oh, okay.
See what I'm saying?
I got you.
Now, it's not because it's trying to correct for what it perceives as a lean condition, because it's seeing the oxygen that didn't burn.
So when it first happens, it will be lean, but then it's rich.
It's going to immediately see a lean signal. And I've been in classes where the instructor would ask that, and about 60% of the mechanics in the classroom would say it was going to see a rich fuel mixture, because they're thinking, well, I'm seeing a lot of gas, but they forget oxygen sensor. It's named that for a reason. Okay? Just don't fall in that trap, all right? Now, like I say, realize that whenever it begins to correct for that, you are going to have a rich condition and all that. Well, you'll also have a situation where the PCM shuts off the fuel injector to the cylinder that's misfiring, too. So you're not, and that'll actually still generate a rich condition because there's oxygen still going through there. Okay, an O2S sensor, oxygen sensor, is tested with a digital multimeter using the min-max function. You know what that is? Does everybody know what the minimum maximum function is?
You missed mine.
Huh?
You missed mine.
9 was B.
Anybody know what min-max is? If I have a meter with min-max on it, what's it going to do?
You can turn it up and down.
Well, actually, no. What it's going to do is it's going to store the minimum reading it has seen and the maximum reading it has seen.
Oh, okay.
And it's also going to give you a live reading. Well, it's actually going to give you a live reading all the time, but in the background, it'll typically store the lowest reading the meter has detected and the highest reading. All right. Let's say that you want to see, after you've been testing for a while, how low did it go? Right? So then you hit your minimum, maximum, and current. Your minimum, if it went down here, let's say it's supposed to be like 0 to 4 volts. 0 to 4.6. Let's say half a volt to 4.6. And you felt your glitch while you had your meter hooked up to it, and you went to minimum current maximum, and your maximum said it went to 7 volts. See how useful that is? Even if it was there for just a brief instant, it's going to pick that up. Now, scope works for that too. But the point is your minimum current maximum is helping you with that. So the readings are minimum 78 millivolts, maximum 932 millivolts, and average 442. See that? Technician A says the engine is operating normally. Technician B says the oxygen sensor is too rich. Who's right about that? Only A. A is right because it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Got it? Oxygen sensors are such a, so much of my life has been spent troubleshooting oxygen sensors. I could talk about them all day long. An oxygen sensor is being tested using a digital storage oscilloscope. We've got a couple of those out here. A good oxygen sensor should display how many switches per second? Got numbers on that, somebody? You're on the right page over. I see some little camel hump.
1 to 5.
Everybody like that answer? Greg, get a right answer from that, huh? 1 to 5 per second. That's pretty strong, but yeah, 1 to 5 per second. I say it's pretty strong. Actually, 15 to 20 per second would be ridiculous, but 1 to 5 per second is what's normal. The P0131 diagnostic trouble code is being described. A technician, they said an exhaust leak upstream of an oxygen sensor could be the cause. Technician B says an extremely rich air fuel mixture could be the cause. Who is correct about that? P0131. What is a P0131? Somebody tell me what that code is. P0131.
Upstream HO2 sensor grounded.
All right. My hearing is not that good, so what was it?
The upstream oxygen sensor's grounded.
Upstream oxygen sensor is grounded. Now, if it's grounded, what's that going to do to the signal? Signal's going to go to, if up is rich, if you ground that signal, it's going to go flatline, isn't it? Got it? All right. So let's look at this again. Could an extremely rich air fuel mixture be the cause?
No.
Not hardly. So you're going to be looking at an A on that one, right? Technician A is right about that because an exhaust leak upstream of oxygen sensor. A lot of people don't realize that an exhaust system has got low pressure pulses that if an exhaust leak has got the right kind of angle to it, can pull fresh air into the exhaust system. The oxygen sensor is going to smell that fresh air, and the PCM is going to ramp up the fuel. So you can have an exhaust leak just upstream of the oxygen sensor and cause the engine to run rich, in spite of the fact that nothing up on the engine is bad. So you got to pay attention to all that.
I got a exhaust leak.
If somebody has thrown an oxygen sensor at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we used to do is when we'd read that voltage with the meters, we'd try to force it rich. Like we would, enrich it with some propane or spray some carburetor cleaner in there and see if it, causes the sensor voltage to go up. Mm-hmm. And if it went up but it went back down, then we would know there was some issue. Sometimes you just got to overfuel it a little bit to see if the thing will respond. And then you can force it lean if it's showing rich all the time by popping a big vacuum line off. And that kind of thing. So just you'll get used to that if you fool with it or not. Oxygen sensors now, though, I'm gonna tell you probably. Amanda, how many miles has your Honda Element got on it?
About 95, 98.
Have you ever even seen a check engine light on it?
Yeah, it's got one right now.
Is that right? You know what it is, or
No.
you never plugged into it? Huh?
No.
Well, my yellow Jeep throws a P0303 code sometimes for some strange reason. It's got a little skip after I park it and let it set a little bit. I'll crank it up and go bop, 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 and then it'll throw a 303 after a little bit. And I got this little $60 code reader I keep on and I plug it in and clear the code. Get rid of that stupid check engine lights, It's good to have a little code reader in your dash. It's a little cheap code reader like the one I got there.
TV late at night, 1 in the morning.
Yeah.
So I know what you're talking about. You seen it? Yeah. I be laughing so long.
A large amount of oxygen. Well, let me back up. A P0133 DTC is being described. Technician A says a defective heater circuit could be the cause. Technician B says a contaminated sensor could be the cause. 13. What do you think?
Charlie.
Hmm?
Charlie.
Charlie, both of them.
Yeah.
Sure.
Both of those guys are right. Either one of them could be the cause of that. A contaminated sensor being contaminated by what?
Fuel.
or,
Air.
let me tell you, I've said this before, and this is an engine repair thing. Let's say you're working on one that has blown a head gasket and a lot of coolant has gone into the exhaust.
Water.
There's there's silicone in antifreeze.
That's right.
And it'll coat that ceramic zirconia, that oxygen sensor, and ruin it, where it won't do a darn thing. So a lot of the times, if you're doing a job where a bunch of coolant has gone into the exhaust, I tell you what, one time we did, you make sure you sell them oxygen sensors too, or tell them you may have bad oxygen sensors, we don't know yet. If you have to have oxygen sensors, you're going to have to pay another $90 per sensor and a little bit more labor. But we're going to not put them on there if you don't need them. And they thought they liked that. You know what I'm saying? And then you come back and say, well, it looks like it got your sensors. We're going to put those on there. So you didn't just throw them in an estimate to start with. Although whatever shop you got is probably going to, make some of those decisions. But anyway, we had one out here, a Toyota Camry that we had pulled the head off and put it back on. And it had a bunch of water coming out the exhaust, just puddling up back there. And I went back there, and there was a sort of a sweet smell to the water, and it was a bluish color.
Dang. High performance.
And I was thinking, golly, what is that? Well, that when the investigation was over with, these yo-yos that had pulled the head off and put it back on, grabbed a hose and said, this looks like it probably goes here. And they took a windshield washer hose and plugged it onto an intake port.
Wow.
So it just
Goodness.
sucks all of the windshield washer fluid through the engine and it's depositing it in a pretty blue puddle back there behind the car. We thought to start with the cat was on the roof, man. We got big trouble here. Well, we fix the vacuum lines and everything's fine. Now, incidentally, that was Donna Roberts' car. Seems like every time we do anything to Donna's car, it blows up in our face, Now, JT promised me Donna's car was going out of there today. Looks like it's going to be on you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where is he at? All right. He had trouble with his truck, even getting to school last night. I know about that. All right, now then. So, a large amount of oxygen in the exhaust system causes the O2 sensor to produce which of these? Low voltage, high voltage, abnormal readings, or false readings?
Well, it'd be lean, so it'd be a low voltage.
Absolutely. Yeah, you picked that up from the previous little comment that I made. What does the post or downstream oxygen sensor measure? Post being in, why do they call that post?
It's afterwards.
Bang, bingo. So you got like post-war would be after the war or whatever. So post or downstream oxygen. So what does it measure?
Oxygen.
The amount of oxygen behind the catalytic converter. What is it store? Why does it need to know that?
How clean it is.
No, actually, that's not the case. What you're looking at the oxygen behind the catalytic converter for is you're trying to see if the catalytic converter is able to store oxygen effectively. If it can't, you're going to get a PO420 code. Now, if you see these oxygen sensors, the front one's like this. And the back one is sort of be like it's right here. That's normal. Okay? But if you see the back one and the front one looking just alike, PO420. Sometimes the catalytic converter can be contaminated with something and cause that. But you got to also remember that the only one that's looking at that on is the light-off catalyst, and that's the one that's right at the manifold. Sometimes on these cars, you'll open the hood and you'll look, and there's a catalytic converter that's about the size of a coffee can there, a 4-pound coffee can, and it'll have an oxygen sensor above it and another one below it. It's checking that to see if it's storing oxygen. It does not even pay any attention to the one behind it. And so what happens here is this girl comes over here from, well, the first thing that happened was I was doing drivability work over there at Bundy's, and this Ford probe came in. PO420 code, go in there, order a catalytic converter. I said, hey, I need to get a catalytic converter coming from this, got a PO420 code. They got me the one that goes in the pipe that ain't even smelling back down the line. It's under warranty anyway. And so they didn't give me the job. They gave it to this yo-yo on the other side of the shop because he was doing exhaust work and all that. He didn't know why a catalytic converter had been ordered. He just popped it on there. He didn't do anything wrong. They said the catalytic converter was ordered for this car, take it, put it on, and he does the torch thing and puts it on there and makes sure it doesn't leak and all that. Pops it outside, and of course I don't know if he cleared the code or what happened. I don't know, for some reason or another, there was no code in it. He may have took the battery cable off before he worked on it, dumped all that. Well, anyway, she comes back like the next day, and she said, hey, I got to check engine light again. Same daggum code. I got another look, and oh crap, this is the one they ordered? I thought. So, anyway, Melissa Land was a girl that worked here, and she was, had a little car that had the same setup on it. It was a Mazda. Comes in here, PO 420 code, and I say, hey, I got to have a catalytic converter. This one's under warranty. Hey, I had to go to Lincoln Mercury place with this, the Mazda place. So she goes over there. They did the same thing. They slammed this catalyst on here back here. Well, they just pull the code. And then she came back, and I see this old rusty catalyst up here that's not working right, and the shiny new one back here. So I called over to talk to Jonathan Chavez. I said, Jonathan, you put the wrong catalyst on this thing, buddy. And he was like, how do you know? I said, well, I'm not here looking at it, and the one with the oxygen sensor is the one in the front. He goes, crap. And so I had to get him back over here. But anyway, it's one of the things you got to make, you got to be a thinker. You got to be somebody that's thinking clearly. All right. Which of these questions refers to dynamic or instantaneous adjustments during braking or acceleration? This is chapter 16. Chapter 16, question 16. We'll be through with this in a minute if you'll bear with me. Come on. Dynamic or instantaneous adjustments like during braking or acceleration. Hey there, William. Casey? Huh?
Okay.
Yeah. That's what I was.
What do you think? That is sort of a crazy question.
Maybe closed loop.
Dynamic or instantaneous adjustments like during braking or acceleration.
If it was closed loop, you'd be paying attention when it's at a certain speed.
That is a
That's
crazy.
closed loop, man.
Yeah, if it's paying attention when you're at a certain speed. He's right. I mean, you're Lawrence is right. I mean, that's but this question right here is so stupid that if I saw this question on a test, I would not have any idea how to answer it. It is the stupidest fool question I've ever seen anybody put on a test. I don't like that question, unless it's your book is probably going to use exactly those same words, and somebody is trying to draw an allegory between that, and I don't know what in the world.
I'm trying to use an example like you did with the air conditioner thing over the wall.
Maybe, but they got something screwed up about that.
What was the correct answer for 15?
15, the amount of oxygen behind the catalytic converter is storing oxygen. The light-off converter is supposed to store oxygen, right? And the only way you can tell if it's storing oxygen is to look at what's coming out of it. All right. So 16 is one that I'm going to throw that question out and write a little note on your test saying instructor threw this question out. I'm just going to give you credit for it because I don't like the question. I think that question just really fund water. I think it's a bad pen. So let's ignore that question. What is the term for a sentence? Well, incidentally, the answer key claims that one is supposed to be B. How in the world? I don't get it. Well, what's this got to do with braking or acceleration? Duh. I don't like that. What is the term for a sensor that has, unless the guy unless he put an allegory in the book that you can track, but closed loop is supposed to be the right answer for that. What's the term for a sensor that has a major influence over the amount of fuel being delivered to the engine? 17. Come on, y'all. Y'all can figure that one out without me telling you anything. The term for a sensor that has a major influence over the amount of fuel being delivered to the engine. High priority. Good answer. That's not complicated. 18. Technician A says the spark knock, which is ping or detonation, can be caused by, that spark knock can be caused by a lean air fuel mixture. Is he right or is he wrong?
He's right.
He's right because I've hammered on that in here, right? Yeah. Lean exhaust is hot. It's just the way it is. Technician B says an inoperative cooling fan could be the cause. It could cause the engine to spark knock.
Smart now.
I think it's just Tech A.
Wait a minute.
Well,
What did I just say about why does a lean air fuel mixture cause ping?
because it's hot.
Okay, so if the cooling fan doesn't work.
Then it'd be hot.
Yeah.
One time where I was about most of your ages in here, there was a cute girl that worked at a Chrysler place named Margaret, and I would call and order parts, and me and her, I took her to the Boondocks restaurant, which is a really nice place where you eat catfish and you watch the alligators swim around. It was on Taylor's Bayou. It was raining that night. Well, on the way home that day, I had my pickup truck. I had a 74 Ford pickup, and I had driven through a storm of rocks coming off of some road machine, right? And didn't think anything about it. But it had knocked a little pinhole in my radiator, just a little small one. No, it just landed right on one of the flues. And so, when I launch into all these stories, it reminds you of Craig, doesn't it? He does that same thing.
Oh.
Yeah, the guy from the, but anyway, so we're driving, I mean, we got through the boondock, it was raining, and they gave us these garbage bags that they split so you can put them over your head and get to the car without getting too wet, because it's really down that part of the country, rain comes up all of a sudden, southeast Texas. And so I says, okay, Margaret, head for the truck. I'll be right behind you. And when I stepped on the first step, my foot went out from under me, and I guess my rear end hit every step all the way down. I was so glad she didn't see that. It embarrassed me, and it hurt too. But anyway, I ran to the truck, got there, and we headed out. We drove out of the rain because it was a long way down to the boondock. We were way out in the country. Of course, I lived kind of out in the country too, but it was a long ways to where I lived. And the dadgum truck started pinging really bad. Labor knock, ping, 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 and it was just rattling and pinging and all that. And I looked down at my temperature gauge, and it was way over here. And so the truck died, and I, you know how they do in the overheat.
Oh, yeah. That's a bad sign.
That's a bad idea. And so I says, I tell you what, I said, what I'll need to do is I'll need to get my landlord's wife to come pick us up and take us. We'll take my other car because I had another car. And so, and I just figured, well, what's done's done, So I took my, I walked to this trailer, and this is how long ago this was. It was this trailer out here, the farm. There was some pole barns out here and stuff, and this young farmer lived in the trailer. So I knocked on the door of the trailer, and it was night, dark, night. And he says, I went boom, boom, boom. He says, come in. And so I just, somebody says, come in, you come in.
Yeah.
So I open the door, and he's sitting in in his chair where he's been reading the paper, and his wife is standing in the hall, and she's wearing a nightgown or something, not particularly revealing, but she was like, ah, so she runs down the hall, I mean, this guy is like a yo-yo out there, just tells her to come in without telling her to go back down. So anyway, I says, I need to use a phone. He says, okay, I'll have to take you to where they have one. He didn't even have a phone. So we got, it's like, you ain't from around here, are you, boy? This kind of stuff, So I go down, he take me to, and I called him, my landlady came pick me up. And we went and got my other car and so on and so forth. But I went back the next morning, and that truck had a 302 in it. And that truck started up, and it ran good. It didn't blow no oil, no gasket. It didn't burn no oil. I just knew I destroyed it. But, I mean, it was amazing to me. It got hot enough to quit. And then it was, now you do that to a 350 Chevrolet, it's toast. You can forget it. Or just about anything else. Dodge truck. But that particular truck, that old 302, was so tough that it happened to me twice for two different reasons. And it didn't hurt it either time, as far as I could tell. It still ran just fine.
So what happens? I mean,
I filled it up with coolant and drove it, just kept driving it.
it was all the water.
Yeah, that was what it was. That little pinhole radiator. All right, but anyway, what led me to that was the pinging. I started hearing pinging because of the heat. See what I'm saying? Pinging, labor knocking, all that. But anyway, that was the long and the short of that. That was an adventure all the way around. Anyway, so question 18 is C. Got to be C. Both of them. If it's overheating or if it's running lean, both of them is going to make it ping. And also, what else is going to happen with your emissions? What's going to happen with your emissions when it starts to run hotter? Remember? We've done some lectures on that. Oxides of nitrogen, you guys. Hot combustion chamber, oxides of nitrogen goes up. You get too lean, oxides of nitrogen goes up. Got it? Lean air fuel mix. Hot makes more NOx. Okay? Think about hot NOx. All right, the powertrain control module measures the blank and then calculates the amount of fuel needed. The powertrain control module, if I can speak, measures the blank and then calculates the amount of what needed.
Is it fuel pressure?
Now wait a minute. Now what's it measuring? The PCM on those old.
It's measuring the
Yeah, that would. What do you think? Anybody got a good number?
Air volume, pressure.
Well, now what do you call those? What do you call a sensor that measures the air?
Mass circle.
Okay, look at your answers again.
C.
What's the difference between mass and volume? Right?
The volume is the amount that's going.
Yeah,
And
says,
mass is the weight of the air.
that's right. That's like my wife, bless her heart, asking me, what is the difference between 16 ounces of flaxseed and a pint of flaxseed? Because they're both 16 ounces, right?
Right.
Or are they?
Yeah.
We're talking about volume and weight.
Oh, yeah. You got me on that one.
Yeah, ounces. Just because you got 16 ounces of flaxseed. Will 16 ounces of flaxseed fill up a pint jar? Don't know, really. I mean, you'd have to try it. You know what I'm saying? But that's the point. You're talking about, get your head together wrapped around this. You're talking about volume or weight. By weight is how fuel is measured by engineers. 14.7 to 1 is by weight. Got it? Everybody know that? 14.7 to 1 is by weight. You know how much it is by volume? For every gallon of gas, you burn 9,000 gallons of air. That's what it is by volume.
For every gallon?
For every gallon of gasoline, you're burning 9,000 gallons of air. Think about that, all right? At 14.7 to 1, which is by weight. Whenever they put fuel in my F-16 fighter jet, how many gallons do you think it holds? They don't know. They put it in there by weight. Makes all sense in the world. That's because they're not standing by a gas pump. We pay for it by the gallon. Engineers use weight. We use gallons because that's how we pay, right? So I think a MiG-25 Foxbat would hold 14 tons of jet fuel or something like that. That's how much they weigh. All right. Furthermore, weight's really important when you're in the air too. Fuel trim provides a method that's capable of changing the amount of fuel delivered to the engine based on feedback from which of these sensors? What did we spend the whole last hour talking about? Oxygen sensors. Gonna be oxygen sensors. Fuel trim and oxygen sensors go hand in hand. Technician A says the primary purpose of the fuel trim is to keep the air-fuel mixture close to 14.7 to 1 as possible. Technician B says when the air-fuel ratio is at 14.7 to 1, the efficiency of the catalytic converter is lowest. Duh. All right, now what do you think about that? Anybody see that answer in the book? Because I don't really like putting it. I could be wrong too. If I was taking this test, if this was an ASE test, and you see questions similar to this on ASE tests, and I have taken lots of ASE tests in my time. Technician A says the primary purpose of the fuel trim is to keep the air-fuel mixture as close to 14.7 to 1 as possible.
That's right.
That sounds right to me. Now the answer key says that that's not right. If you see anything, yeah, exactly. So that's a stupid wrong answer on the answer
It
key.
says the PCM tries to keep the air fuel mixture at 14.7 to 1 under most conditions.
Under most conditions, yeah. And that's now is the catalytic converter efficiency lower there or higher?
I think it'd be as high as
It's got to be, yeah, exactly. That's what I want to do. The catalytic converter can do its job. So it's got to go. I'm going to say that's going to be an A. That's going to be an A. And circle that one because in case the answer key doesn't get corrected. If the air-fuel ratio is 14.7 to 1, which of these is the lambda value?
1.0.
1.0. Yeah, get that lambda value. Let me tell you something, y'all. On the newer cars, you're going to see that value displayed on the scan tool. You're going to see the lambda value. You look, instead of seeing some of the other numbers you're used to seeing. Technician A says air-fuel ratios lower than 1.0 indicate a lean mixture. Technician B says higher than 1.0 indicate a rich mixture.
Reverse and either.
So you would say that number, what was that?
23.
23 is D.
24 is the boy. All right. Now let's see. If lower indicates a lean mixture, and
Indicates a rich.
wouldn't higher indicate a rich one?
Right.
Huh?
But lower indicates a rich mixture, not a lean mixture.
And so that was just about, if that was going to be, so if what you're saying is true there, then that's going to be a D? Is that what you said? Oh, it's a dog. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. All right. I'm just trying to get everything. To determine the air-fuel ratio, if lambda is given, multiply the lambda times which of these? 0.47, 147, 2.47, or 1.47? That's going to be a D. Now, wait a minute. If it's 1.0, and I multiply that times 1.47, what's that going to do?
You said 1.1? If you multiply it times 1.1?
Well, no, I mean like 1.0. If let's assume that my air-fuel ratio, if lambda is 1.0, if I multiply that times 1.47, what's going to be the answer to that multiplication?
1.47.
Yeah. I mean, 14.7? Wouldn't that be right?
Yeah.
Because you're wanting 14.71. If lambda is given, is 0.98, what does that mean? Does it mean the mixture is lean? Does it mean it's within 2% of stoichiometric? Does it mean it's slightly rich, or both B and C?
Both.
Both B and C, right? That's gonna be a D. Burn that stuff in. It's easy to forget it. All right. And we have blown through that.
He said C and then he said B. So I want to see. What was the 19? Was it B or C?
19 was Charlie.
Okay.